Okay.
My
All
laptop's
right,
just
that's
sharing.
right. We go back
Should
to
I
where we
retry?
So,
Let me click the link again.
that's a good reference. Yeah, I'm always 10 years old. What happened?
No, you're good. You're good.
Ah, shoot, I just stopped sharing. Alright, let me start again.
I'm already old. I talked to
Sharing.
the kids who like didn't even experience.
And
Cool. And then let's hit the high. Awesome. That's gonna bring up $200 in one day.
can you guys see my slides when I switch over to it? Yeah? Alright.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good? Yes? No? Maybe?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, everybody. We are back on, and here's Marco Ledesma to talk about Vue internationalization.
Alright. Hello, I'm Marco. I work for Leasecake. We are a lease management software company. If you own commercial real estate property and you need a system to help manage your leases, go to Leasecake and sign up. We're a young startup here in Orlando. And my talk today is going to be on Vue internationalization, how you can add multi-language support into your Vue applications. And also a better way to read your app's copy, which is, I think, the bigger value I got from this experience. So let me talk about what library we're using for this. So there's a library out there called i18n. That library was built in pure JavaScript for JavaScript. This library adds support for multiple frameworks. You can implement it in your PHP, in your Vue app. In our case, we needed this for our front-end Vue application, as well as our React Native app. And it was really easy to just incorporate them both. It has the methodology, or just the learn once, write everywhere, which is kind of the same way with React Native. So it's the same core API, and you can, once you learn how to use it with Vue, you can learn how to use it in React. It's really easy. So that's the library we're using. But why would you want to use it? So I highlighted here time saver twice, and I'll explain that in a minute. But it lays a foundation for global support in your application. So it allows you to switch between English, Spanish, whatever language you want to incorporate. It allows you to add that into your app. It's very easy to add, especially in Vue, much like other plugins. And it's easy to add to an existing app. So I recommend that even if you're not just starting with your app, if you have an existing one, it's better to start late than never, and you'll be really grateful for it down the line. And again, it's a time saver. So initially when we were incorporating this, it was proposed by one of our developers out in Romania. He has a lot of experience working with this library, and he really pushed to put it in, and I was skeptical at first, much like I always am with anything new. Alex knows. So, we incorporated it, and at first I was like, we're adding so much boilerplate code just to do really simple things. We can't just, you're no longer typing your text within your HTML elements. You're now referencing variables from a dictionary file into your elements. But as long as you stick to that pattern, in the long run, it pays off. Because with Leasecake, we implemented this feature called ACH. It allows tenants to pay their landlords. But to implement that, we had to create about 10 or 15 different screens with a bunch of text everywhere. And it would have been a pain to tell management before we went live to tell them, hey, go through these 10 or 15 screens, tell us what text you want to change, and then we'll change it. It wasn't anything like that at all. We just sent them 2 big JSON files that had all of our text. Our marketing guy reviewed it, our CEO and them reviewed it. They sent it back to us, and we just copied and pasted, and everything was done. It was super cool that happened.
Your CEO can read JSON?
Yeah. Yeah. He's a little tech savvy. So it's cool that that's the value that it adds. There's also the value that you can switch between languages, but I'm sure with a startup, you don't really want to invest in that just yet because you're trying to move fast. But in the long run, it does pay off for just that ability. So how does the code look? In the front end, it's just a standard JSON file, or it can be a JavaScript file. In my example that I created, I used a JavaScript file, and it's nothing but key value pairs and one giant object nested and so on. And the way it's used in your templates is using a global T function. Using one of the libraries that wraps i18 next, it exposes a public function called T in your templates. And it allows you to just pass in the key that you want, like title, and then it goes into your dictionary file, finds that key, and then renders it. And you can't really see it on the screenshot, but there's an additional attribute to your component. It's called i18n options, and you can give it a key prefix. So instead of typing pages.home.title each time, if you're in your home component, you just have to tell the key prefix to look for pages.home. So that's what's really cool. It saves you a bunch of time. So what else can it do? It handles pluralization, which I think is really awesome, because I'm sure as developers we've encountered, if the count is greater than 1, then you throw an S at the end of a word, otherwise you don't. This handles that for you by reading that interpolated value that you're passing in. It supports nesting, and when I was practicing for this, I was having a hard time describing how nesting makes sense. But you can think of it as you can have multiple JSON dictionary files. You may have a glossary, and in that glossary you'll have your app's name. Well, you may reference your app's name in other components and in other dictionary files. Well, instead of typing that app name over and over, in one of those JSON files, you can reference your other JSON file in it by using the T function. So that's the way of nesting. And it'll make more sense when I show the example. Namespaces. So when you're building in a small app, you probably only have one dictionary file. You can call it global.json or whatever. But as your app grows, you're going to want to have that file split into smaller components. That way you're not reading one massive dictionary file. That's what namespaces does. And it's part of i18n, and it's right out of the box. And then there's custom interpolation, which if you don't know what interpolation means, it's just a string literal that gets a placeholder replaced by a variable. And you can actually override what happens during that formatting. And it'll make more sense in the demo, but just know that you can take control over that formatting at any moment. So here's the demo. Let me exit out of here. All right, so first let me show you what I built. So I built this quick little app, actually using the Hello World template. I ran that Vue CLI command. It created my repository for me. I then added a couple of components, changed the app.vue to house all those different components. Basically, the center right here is the content view, and as I click on these different menu items, it swaps the component that's in the content view. And if you click on this button, it changes the language to Spanish. And all the text that you see here is rendered from those dictionary files. So let me show you how all this is set up. So again, this project was created using the Vue CLI tool. It started off as a simple prototyping application. I added 2 dependencies to make this work, and that's the i18 Next core library and the Panther Vue i18 Next wrapper. It's just a nice little wrapper over that core library. And then I added one more dependency, moment.js, which I hate now, but it's really good for formatting dates. It's just huge. So I don't recommend it. There's a light version of moment that's a lot better. So that's it for the project dependencies. I also put in the project structure, just to make sense of what's going on. There's a components folder, and in that I have all our content that gets swapped out. We have the navigation menu that changes to which navigation item is selected. We have our locales. This is the dictionary that I built for i18 Next. The i18n folder is not really necessary. I built it to organize my code. The locales and the en and es, all that's just whatever you want it to be. I made it this way because it made more sense. But I'll explain all that as I get into it. And then we have our app.vue and then our main.js. So let me jump into main.js. So the main.js is where your Vue app gets booted. It's very simple in this case. All I added was this i18n configuration that I got from my index file in this folder. So if we navigate in there, you'll see that there is some boilerplate to write, but once you write it once, you never have to really touch it again. And there's a lot of extra things I added to this file that aren't even necessary to get this to work. So, but I'll explain bit by bit. So you gotta import Vue first. You gotta import the library that wraps i18 next. You then have to import the i18 next core library. And then your resources are the dictionary files that I created. And then moment is moment. You then tell Vue to use that plugin. And by calling Vue.use, it's gonna expose that public T function. So it'll allow you to use that in any component. And then you initialize your i18x configuration. There's a million types of props you can pass to this thing, but the only ones you really need are the language that you want to use, in this case English, the fallback language, again English, and then your resources, which is just an object with your languages in it. The rest of the stuff, like parse missing key handler, it's kind of self-explanatory. If you're passing in a key in one of your components and you can't find it in any of your dictionary file, what verbiage do you want to display on the screen? In this case, I wrote invalid i18 key. It's hard to say, i18n. And then interpolation. So this is, I wanted to override the way it formats some of the text for me. I wanted to make sure that if I'm passing in a date in English, it displays it the way people who speak English would like to see it. But if I pass it in Spanish, I would like for that to be displayed in the way Spanish people like to see it. And it's cool that you have that control. The format uppercase, that's just an example, but it's not really used, so don't look at that. All right, let me show you what one of these components looks like. So I'll go into the home component. All right, so in home, I'm telling it to load the title from my underscore comment file. And I want it to look at the pages key that has a home key that has a title key. And if I open up that file, we will see that it's reading from this. Wait, what happened to my home? There it is. Sorry, guys. There. Okay. So if we're looking at the home.view component, it's going to look in my common.js. It knows my default language is English, so it knows which folder to look at for this file. And it's going to look in the pages home title key in order to load home. And it's the same concept for everything else. So it loads the description and then a button to change the language. But what's cool about this particular dictionary definition is that change language accepts a parameter. And the parameter is lang. So as a second, what do you call it? As a second parameter that you can pass to this global T function is an object with key values. And those key values will get interpolated into that string and then outputted. So that's what we're doing here. And I wanted to show something cool with the whole key prefix and namespaces. So it is cumbersome to write this all the time, right? Especially if you're only going to use common pages home. So what you can do is I can remove this and just put title, and then content, and then leave the buttons. If I were to save this the way it is, it would give me that invalid i18 key because it can't find the keys because I didn't tell it where to look at. But if I uncomment this i18n options, it now knows to first look at the comment file, go to the key prefix of page or pages, and then look at home. And if I refresh, it works. And I want to show one more file, and that's my login. Because in there I have how it handles pluralization. So right now I'm sending it a, well, let me look at the login file actually. So I added a quick example of how it handles pluralization by you typing in the password. So if I was to type in one letter, it'll tell me you entered 1 character. The minimum is 6. If I enter 2, it knows to put the S on there. And the key that I gave it to render that error message remains the same. The only thing that changes is the count. And i18n knows to look at the count to update, well, to figure out to use the pluralization version of that or not. So it's pretty smart. And it's cool to see that in Spanish too. So that's basically it for the demo. It's very standard Vue, like you have your components, your template code. So yeah, I'll be happy to share that repo. Going back to the presentation though, there's 2 more pages here. So you really only need i18 next. You don't need that other wrapper because it's all pure JavaScript. But the wrapper is nice to give you that global T function so you don't have to code that yourself. It also is the one that gives us that key prefix because I found that if you use other Vue wrappers, they don't give you that. There's actually an official one that I don't use because of that reason. Maybe there's workarounds, but and then if you want to know more, there's really good documentation on this, especially the interpolation format overriding, which is what I used Moment for. I don't want to go back to it now, but it's pretty simple to understand. And if you want to look at the supported frameworks, you'll see just from this image alone of how many different frameworks this thing supports. And if you scroll down, you'll see all the different libraries that you can import into Angular, Vue, Inferno, Express, Meteor, .NET, Android, iOS.
Web components.
Yeah.
And if there's Marco.js.
What? Oh. Oh, that's great. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
Can you show the structure for the entry point of the localization files?
Oh,
You
yeah.
said it's just a giant object, right?
Yes. So if I look at the index, oh, this is the configuration. But if I look at the locales, I'm just exporting out an object with the key of en and es. And
Okay.
if you look at those index files, those have your common and navigation namespaces. Then you can add as many as you want.
And, I mean, I guess you're going to be writing a lot of JavaScript since it's Vue.js, but is there any YAML support? Because I imagine writing
Yep.
out YAML.
Oh, I'm sure there is, but I'm not sure. I know there's JSON support, so you can actually have your web application, your backend, generate those. That way you can use it both in the backend and the front end.
Wow.
And build it in your deployment pipeline and all that. Anybody else? No? All right, awesome. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. Can you believe this is his first ever talk?
That was really good.
Really? Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
How long have you been a developer? Like, gee, I can't
7
believe it's
years.
taken that long. Well, that brings us to the end of Vue.js Orlando. The good news is, because afterward everyone's like, when's the next one? The next one's already being scheduled. On the 17th of April, 7 p.m. this room, we will have our next meetup. I'll post the details tomorrow. We're going to have an international speaker broadcast right here talking about Hasura, which is a GraphQL server. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's really cool. Just want to plug our knuckleheaded sibling meetup on Thursday, which is the Orlando React meetup. Just always like to do a little bit of cross-pollination there.
Crash it. Crash it.
I'm going to go wearing all green. This is conservative. Anyways.
Speaking of opinionated.
All right, that's all for me. Everybody have a good night.